Hi. This piece is not about whether women's footballers should get paid the same level as their male equivalents. Of course, they should. At some point in the future, I believe it's inevitable. It's the same thing as when Billie Jean King had her vision for women's tennis 50 years ago. And that led to the fact that if you look at this year's Forbes list for the top 10 earners in tennis, you'll see that five are women and five are men. Change doesn't just happen, you have to make it happen. I think we all know that. But on the journey from here to equality, there will be different views on the right route, pace of change, how to start the journey even. And right now, one of the world's pioneers in football, Equal Pay, has arrived at a fork in the road that I think bears analysis. My credentials for doing this piece are that as an elected director, I was quite literally in the room when that pioneer, Lewes Football Club, plotted and then instigated its groundbreaking Equality FC initiative. And now the club has arrived at a point where it could start to pay its women footballers more than its men. I think it should and must, and here's why. And just for the sake of clarity, I was on the Lewes FC board for over 10 years, but I hit a term limit of 12 years last year, so I'm no longer on the board. So this is me as an independent commentator. So in 2017, Lewes Football Club, I think it's fair to say, shook the footballing world and divided opinion. Quite simply, the club decided to draw a line in the sand and move immediately to a position where its women's and men's teams received equal resourcing. So that was equal training, playing facilities, equal marketing, equal voice, and most strikingly, of course, equal playing budgets. It was a move that was done by increasing the funding for the women's team without any reduction in the men's budget. And of course, major football clubs could not immediately follow suit, even if they'd wanted to, which I don't think they did. But the modest size of the club's budget meant that it could. So it did, and it did it to lead the way. And no one could ever say again that gender equality in football was impossible, because it wasn't. And the whole debate about gender equality in football was amplified at that time. So the Equality Initiative was first proposed by my fellow board director and friend Ed Ramsden. He showed me a draft of his election address for the club's 2016 board elections, where we were both restanding for a further 3-year term. The directors of the Lewes FC board, Lewes Community Football Club board, are all elected. What he'd written was the case for an equalisation of the club's resources between its men's and women's teams, and immediately resonated with me. And I stood on the same platform. We were both successful, and following in-depth board discussions on July the 8th, 2017, Equality FC was formally adopted and announced. Policy was not without detractors, and at a point not that long after that, one of the board members resigned in protest. Anyhow, so back in 2017, Lewes FC wanted to make a bold and super clear statement. So we decided on equal everything. Since then, the club's women have moved up a league to the Women's Championship, putting them in the top 24 teams in the country. The men's team have also moved up a league to the 7th tier of men's football. Sponsorship revenues have also greatly increased, as have attendances and other associated revenues. In short, Equality FC has indisputably worked so far. But here's a fork in the road, and it's one that I think other clubs will, in time, arrive at too. So what Lewes FC does matters. And to me, it boils down to if you think the club's move to equal playing budgets was a destination, or instead a starting point along the way. First, a bit of context would be an idea. So when me and Ed first discussed what became Equality FC, we didn't know how well it would work and hadn't mapped out its evolution. It was a decision made on principle. So let me say this as a co-architect of Equality FC. In my mind, and I can't talk for anybody else, that equalising playing budgets was a starting point. It was an immediate and clear expression of gender equality that we were practically able to afford as a club. And after the introduction of Equality FC, some people did ask why the women's team would even then not be paid more than the men's team, as they played at a much higher level. And in sport, the more elite players do command greater rewards than others. Professor Jane English, in her seminal 1978 essay, Sex Equality in Sports, called these scarce benefits, and she stated that the term scarce benefits is not meant to imply that they are kept artificially scarce, but that it's simply not possible for prizes and publicity to be attained equally by everyone at once. In other words, the best sports people at the highest levels get the biggest rewards. But we felt that the move to equal playing budgets was proportionate and powerful at that time. I don't actually remember it ever being explicitly discussed, in fact, that we'd go beyond equal pay at that point. So I'd go further and say that the principle was not equal playing budgets. That was a strategy more than an objective. The principle was female footballers are unfairly disadvantaged by their sex, irrespective of ability and achievement, and we want to end that disadvantage. Equal playing budgets and equal everything else too appropriately demonstrated that principle in an incredibly clear way and made a practical and emotional difference to our own female players and across the whole club too. The disadvantage we were addressing was, and still is, twofold. Firstly, the sexist attitudes that exist and abound now. But secondly, the historical disadvantage caused by the 1921 ban on women's football in England and repeated in Brazil, France, Germany and Spain, which denied the women's game some 70 years of development. So this in particular not only helped to create the current day sexism in football, but it also left the men's game to reap all the huge economic and cultural rewards of football's rising popularity. So Equality FC was affirmative action, designed to help female footballers redress as fast as possible the gaping inequality. And as Ed Ramson stated in his 26 election address, that men's football dominance was, to quote, more a function of it having been systematically given nearly all of the money and attention for many decades than any innate human preference for men's sport. So we arrive at that fork in the road. Either through longer-term increased revenues from the women's game, so better TV deals, bigger sponsorships and so on, or from immediate-term external investment, Lewes FC has the opportunity to enter a new phase to once again take the road untravelled by any club in the world, to my knowledge, to enable its women's team to now receive a bigger playing budget than its men's. This would enable the team to compete and progress in an ever stronger league. To not do so would restrict the team and its players' progression. It would mean Equality FC being interpreted to act as a block on the female players, and that was absolutely never intended, quite the opposite. So I go back to the original principle of not disadvantaging the club's women's team. And there's one final but crucial aspect of Equality FC. When we introduced it, we explained that not only would it do no harm to our men's team and its supporters, but that it would in time lift them up as well, that it could lift all men up. In fact, there's still a prominent advertising board at the club's ground that says proudly, "Equality is a rising tide that lifts all boats." In other words, when women benefit, so do men, and not just in football. This is meant both financially and also in terms of breaking stereotypes. On the former, since 2017, almost all major sponsorships have come in due to Equality FC and the women's team. Ownership numbers have grown and a new state-of-the-art pitch was installed just over a year ago, thanks to a 100% grant from the Premier League to support the development of women's football. The women's team is also on the cusp of major external investment. The whole club, of course, have benefited and will continue to benefit from all of these things, I'm absolutely sure. But go back to 2002, when an existing local women's team became Lewes FC Ladies, as teams were called then. It came over to the club from somewhere else. And it was the women's team at that point that benefited from the association facilities that had been created by the men's team. And this, for me, is the nature of Equality FC 2.0, the next phase. I know there are some Lewes FC supporters who take equality to mean the women and men getting the same things at the same time. That's got to be fair, right? And to a great extent, that is what has happened to date. But this synchronised approach will hold back progress, at least in a football club. The women's and men's teams at Lewes operate in very different leagues now, with different competitive sets and in very different marketplaces, and both share the aim of winning promotions and being the best they can, but how they each achieve their aim and what they need to do and when differ. The club's overall aim firmly remains to campaign for and pioneer gender equality in football. The destination remains both teams being able to operate to the maximum of their potential, where decisions are taken irrespective of the player's sex. However, in Equality FC, those decisions are, as I said, always taken with a view to how the other team can benefit too. So when the Premier League paid for a brand new pitch, as I've mentioned, to support women's football, both teams benefited simultaneously, of course. The shift in Equality FC 2.0 is that those shared benefits may not happen at the same time. They may be asynchronous. So an investment in the women's team brings immediate benefit to that team, even including an increased playing budget. But if and when that playing budget brings better performances that attract more sponsors, more club owners and more media attention, the club's men's team will also in turn benefit from the increased revenues. This is the equality ladder, where each team can take advantage of specific growth opportunities that will move them up the ladder, but enable them to give a helping hand to bring the other team up. In time, it may well be that via promotion or their own investment even, the men's team bring in significantly more revenue that pushes them further up the ladder again, further than the women. In that case, it will once more be the women's team getting a helping hand like they did back in 2002. Simone de Beauvoir famously said, "Her wings are cut and then she is blamed for not knowing how to fly." Equality FC began the process of restoring those wings, at least in football. Equality 2.0 will allow Lewes FC to soar.